Hello, my name is David Rand from the organization Atheist Freethinkers in Montreal, Canada, and I would like to talk to you briefly about two words, Atheophobia and Islamophobia. Yes, I know you're probably rather tired of hearing about things whose name ends in phobia or phobe, so am I up to a point. But some of these words are justified, representing real phenomena, while others are not. First of all, the age-old prejudice against atheists and atheism, the idea that atheists are immoral or amoral, or that atheism necessarily leads to moral degradation. This irrational fear, this absurd antipathy towards atheism and towards atheists, is called atheophobia. It is very old. It goes all the way back to Plato, who, in his 10th book of the Dialogue on Laws, advocated draconian measures against atheists and others that he called impious, proposing that they be isolated from society in what we today would call concentration camps. The suffix phobia implies not just fear, but an irrational or obsessive fear, one which is unhealthy and unjustified. Thus, the expression Islamophobia is fraudulent, as there are excellent reasons to fear, or at least mistrust, a religion, and in particular Islam, and especially its political variant Islamism. But anti-atheist prejudice, on the other hand, cannot be justified. It is indeed a phobia. Strictly speaking, atheophobia is the thesis that atheists are somehow morally inferior to religious believers. This idea is founded on divine command theory, that is, the theory that morality emanates from the will of the divinity. It is obviously completely without value. Our human moral sense is the product of our biological and cultural evolution. Our morality is part of our heritage as a social species. To identify this heritage with the belief in a sort of cop daddy dictator in the sky is an outrageous lie, a shameless fraud which is at the heart of the tenets of every monotheism such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. I, David Rand, am an atheist. I know as much about the will of God as any pope, priest, imam, rabbi, or other religious leader, and yet I know absolutely nothing about the will of God, which is exactly what everyone else knows. Nobody has a clue about the will of God. Nobody knows anything. The morality of these monotheisms is thus fundamentally a perversion of our natural human morality. God belief cheapens morality, reducing it to mere rewards and punishments meted out by a cruel tyrant in the heavens. You are no doubt familiar with the famous quotation from a character in a Dostoevsky novel, "If God does not exist, then everything is permissible." This is false. It is the opposite which is true. If one believes in God, then anything and everything is permitted, because all it is required to justify one's behavior is to declare that it conforms to the will of one's God. And that's it. No one can object because it is impossible to verify the will of God, because the will of God is completely unknown, or, to put it frankly, fictional and arbitrary. Neither should we say that we atheists can be good without God. That is like saying that even women can be intelligent. Rather insulting statements. Instead, we should say that even the religious, despite their belief in a fictional God, can be good persons, provided that they set aside their belief in their everyday life, provided that they heed the advice of their own consciences, rather than obey the decrees of the religious leaders who falsely claim to speak for God. We atheists are not perfect, but at least we have one vice fewer than believers. Our behavior is not perturbed by irrational God belief. When atheists behave well, they do so not in order to win divine rewards or out of fear of divine punishment. They avoid this mercenary calculation and act instead according to their own judgment. There exists another, more diffuse form of this prejudice, an atheophobia in the broad sense, which considers atheist activism to be a threat to other people's freedom of belief. This is false as well. In reality, religions themselves pose a greater threat to freedom of conscience in general, including freedom of belief. This prejudice can even be found in organizations which promote secularism and skepticism, but who try to disguise the presence of large numbers of atheists within their ranks. As for Islamophobia, on the other hand, the situation is completely different. This term is highly problematic and should be avoided for the following reasons. Firstly, it is generally used by Islamists as well as their allies and dupes as an accusation to censor and silence any criticism of Islam, as if such criticism were a form of racism, which of course it is not. A religion is not a race. Secondly, given the suffix phobia, Islamophobia literally means an unjustified and irrational fear of Islam. However, as I have already mentioned, to fear or mistrust Islam is not necessarily irrational. On the contrary, to oppose Islam, at least its more fundamentalist and extremist manifestation known as Islamism, is both rational and necessary. A complete absence of fear of Islam or Islamism would be foolish and irrational. And thirdly, the word is often incorrectly used to mean a prejudice against Muslims. That is to say, a group of persons, whereas Islam is not a group of persons, but rather a religious ideology. This confusion between opposing an ideology on the one hand and being prejudiced against a whole class of persons on the other hand is sometimes deliberately promoted by Islamists in order, once again, to stigmatize criticism of their political religious ideology. I would like to quote from the Manifesto of the Twelve, first published in Charlie Hebdo in 2006. I understand that at least one of the 12 signatories of this manifesto is present among you in Warsaw at your Days of Atheism event for 2019. I quote, "We refuse to renounce our critical faculties out of fear of encouraging Islamophobia, an unfortunate concept which confuses criticism of Islam as a religion with stigmatization of believers." That quote is an excellent summary of the problems with the term. Salman Rushdie and many others have also criticized the use of the term Islamophobia. So in summary, we have two words, both ending in the suffix phobia, but which are completely different in that the first, Atheophobia, describes a real prejudice against which we must work, whereas the second, Islamophobia, is an imposture, a term which is at best erroneous and at worst dishonest. Anyway, thanks for listening, and please accept my atheist salutations to you. All the best at Days of Atheism 2019. I have fond memories of my previous visits to Warsaw and other cities in Poland, and of the warm welcome I received from Nina and her colleagues. I regret that I cannot be with you in person this year. Keep up the good work. Thank you.